but I won't be reading your stuff early.
Yeah.
So minimum 5, 10.
Matt, what about you guys?
Yeah, we probably use more than we should sometimes, but one of the things is that there's the front end use, functionality for the front end user, but then we use some to make the back end easy to use as well. I think Adminimize is one of the plugins we use to help customize the back end, which is a nice one. We hide things from our clients that they don't need to be clicking on. So there's a few extra that maybe not everyone would use that we use to do that. But Gravity Forms is one we use on every site. We really like the WordPress.com stats because you can see a little bit more than you can with the Google Analytics, at least from within the dashboard. Mm-hmm. Of course, we use Google Analytics as well on all of our sites, so there's all the information we need there. But our clients really like the simple interface of the WordPress.com where they can see, I've had this many visitors today, and it's all right there.
Yeah, I think one of the keys with plugins is not to install plugins that you don't absolutely need. For the most of the sites I build are for business clients, and so they need feature X, Y, and Z, so we just put X, Y, and Z. We don't add, what if we added this little toolbar? That'd be fun. And on our personal site, that's a little bit more of a temptation, I think, just to throw on features. But if you use a caching plugin, then that will actually eliminate a lot of the problems that come from having too many plugins. Granted, if they are all loading JavaScript, then you can slow down your site with JavaScript. But the PHP, querying the database, the plugins, a lot of that will be alleviated, at least on the front end of the site, with a caching plugin. And W3 Total Cache is the one that I recommend for caching there. But I say we probably have about 15 or 20 plugins per site, which I know that's higher than what a lot of people recommend, but they're all core to what our sites do. And there would be no point in having the site without some of those things.
And that's a good point.
I love W3 Total Cache, because you can even combine JavaScript and CSS files from other plugins. And so there's only one CSS file and one JavaScript file. And it's just awesome. It just makes the site run so much faster.
Yeah, just the very basics, page caching, and using a CDN will save a lot, but then it has a lot of those more advanced features like SQL query caching and minifying and those kinds of things. For really advanced sites, you'll want to get into that. Like Mashable, they're the ones that wrote the plugin, and so of course they need that for their traffic. Stephanie, what about you? Average number of plugins, tips for keeping the plugin load down? Average
number is probably about 10, and most of them are administrator things to make my life easier. And so I've got, Akismet and Stats and Google Analyticator and the XML sitemaps and a contact plugin, usually Gravity Forms. I've got one called Clean Notifications that I use on almost every site, and it just cleans up the notification emails that you get with comments for moderation and that sort of thing, and does HTML formatting on them. So that's a much simpler email that you see. There's one called Changelogger that actually shows the most recent entry in the plugin changelog file when you go to update them, so you can see what changed. Brilliant. I don't know why it's not built in. Those are probably pretty much the ones My Page Order. I still use a lot of page listings rather than menus in some situations, and my Page Order gives you a drag and drop reordering interface. I use that a lot. But I will say, one of the sites that I run has more than 20 plugins for various reasons. Some of them, like that one, has a podcast associated with it, and we've got 2 different plugins working with our podcast. We've got the sort of basic one, and then we've got podcast channels, which lets you do a different podcast for different categories. And so that's 2 right there, And so we start doing stuff like that, and it starts to build pretty quickly. But there's another plugin called WP Tuner that I use to find out how hard I'm hitting my database. It'll tell me where the slowdown is, if it's coming from a plugin or a theme file, or if my database server is just too slow or something like that. So I'll check that after I've installed 40 plugins and find out what I'm doing wrong here. And actually, all-in-one SEO popped up on one site that I had as being really slow. And so I looked at it and I was like, what am I doing with this one? Do I need it? And I thought, actually, no, I can just take all that stuff out, code it into my theme for this particular site, and then I don't need all-in-one anymore. Just
Took a note of that.
Yeah, we do a lot of that too with putting the SEO stuff just in the theme
Yeah.
itself. I mean, it runs a little bit faster there,
Yeah.
but it takes some coding to set it up. So.
It does.
Yeah.
Other questions? Time for a couple more, I think, if there are any more. Well, you can ask another one.
Well, I was just wondering, before Randy actually taught WordPress at UT Dallas, I'm like one of the grad students that went through learning Dreamweaver. And I was wondering, is the transition from a static-based website builder to something like CMS, like WordPress, is it fairly easy? I mean, I know I tried Drupal and Joomla, but WordPress is a lot simpler. Is the transition simpler for people who work all their lives in Dreamweaver moving on to this new platform, because it's totally different? It's online, it's in real time.
It is really different. I was talking to somebody earlier about making that transition, and really learning to create your own themes is not terribly difficult if you have that HTML and CSS experience once you figure out what's going on with the loop. Like, the rest of it is fairly simple. You've got get header and get sidebar and get footer, and you can figure all of that out. But the loop is just sort of invisible, and it just runs, and it's there, and you're like, where's this stuff coming from? So, like, really reading the codex page on the loop and figuring out how that works is one of the most essential things that you could do to figure out themes in WordPress.
So like the percentage, I'm sure I'm not the only one who's not much of a code developer, but what would be a percentage of knowledge for each of the codes should we study or become familiar with? Because I know it's CSS, HTML, PHP, jQuery. I mean, do we have to be developers, or what's a certain amount?
I don't do jQuery much at all. I'll tell you that right now.
I'm a really good Googler, honestly. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think of myself as a developer, but I can copy paste and kind of figure out what's going on. So a lot of the information's out there. But yeah, the four you mentioned, CSS, HTML, PHP. jQuery, it's just fanciness. You don't need to know that, honestly. Yeah, and at this point now, I've been developing websites for over 10 years now. So I came from the flat, static HTML. I still use Dreamweaver for building WordPress. I am so much faster now at WordPress sites than I am at even flat HTML sites that I would rather build a site in WordPress even if it doesn't need WordPress anymore. Because it has that, I only have to make one header and then it's done, and I don't have to put that in 20 different files or use a bunch of includes or things like that. So I think you'll get there. Start playing with some themes and you'll pick it up.
The question I often get from people who are new to WordPress is, well, can WordPress do X, Y, and Z? And I always have to remind them that WordPress is generating HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and it's using PHP, but the websites that it builds are still HTML and CSS and JavaScript. So if you know HTML and CSS and JavaScript, and like Leia, I've been building sites since before WordPress, and so when I came to WordPress, the choice wasn't between not building the site at all or building it in WordPress. It was, do I use, build it statically or build it in WordPress? And so I think that does help a lot as you're learning, because again, WordPress is just generating these HTML and CSS files. But it's not something that you have to know to get started. And I think when you get started with WordPress, getting a theme that you like and tweaking it. I mean, if you're going to tweak a theme, you've got to tweak the HTML and CSS. That's what it's generating. That's what you've got to work with. But you don't have to know PHP all that much. You don't have to know how to query the database to get started. But you would definitely want to start moving that direction, depending on what you want to do. But if you want to build websites for clients with premium themes and they just want to tweak their logo, that's something you can do pretty easily without knowing all of that. I will say for me it was tricky getting into a content management type of mode, because when you build HTML and CSS websites, you just code it and you write your code clean and efficient. You don't have to worry about which parts of this have to be managed by a client. If you need to make a change, you just open up the file and do it, or you do a global replace if you need to change the header. That's actually more of, I guess, a paradigm change in the way you think about which parts of the page are editable, which are not. I mean, when we roll out sites, the client can't change the color scheme to blue or move columns around, but they can edit the content. So figuring out which parts are editable and which parts are not is a big part of that process.
I think if you start at CSS, you're going to have a big part right there that you can do so much in CSS. And then you take that and you just start breaking themes. You take 2010 and you put it on a test site that's not your live site, and you just start messing with the style sheet in CSS. And I would venture to say, because this is my own story and experience with WordPress and web design, is the style sheet, when it clicked for me on CSS, was wow, I could do so much stuff just with that. Colors, backgrounds, I don't know, moving containers and stuff like that. You stub that knowledge out and get good at it, and then you start dabbling in, what's this PHP stuff? You know, let me get into the loop and let me get into that. And the codecs and Googling is so awesome for that. But if you just camp out in CSS, you're going to get a long ways into web design in general, and in additionally with WordPress.
I think, Mara, you had one more question.
Yeah, I'm curious what your workflow is like, because you're an agency, correct? Okay. And then as far as like how it pushes through, would be like a flat site where you start and go. What does that workflow look like? And I'm also curious, how much did you sort of pull the curtain back when you were essentially tweaking and modifying a theme for a state? I would assume you don't go to the customer developer, but just kind of pull this off. But I'm curious, do you feel an obligation to tell them? Not. Basically, what do you tell them about that? If anything.
Yeah, I'll answer your first question first. We're a small shop, so we have I started my business in my spare bedroom, and at that point I did everything. It was just me, and then I've added these great guys to work with me, and so now I'm able to now focus more on doing sales and kind of project management. I see things through to the end. But then Daniel and Aaron, and we've got a guy named Jonathan, and another guy named Matt that helps us some. That typically when we have a project, it goes to one person. So we're not like an RD2 where one person does this little piece of the pie and then they pass it on to somebody else. We have one person that literally goes from a blank slate in Photoshop to launching the website. And then I'm there working with the client, communicating, working with Aaron or Daniel on that process. So it's what we found is that it makes it simple. We like simple. The client isn't relating to multiple people and getting confused with, well, who am I supposed to ask about this? So I like that process. Now, it does limit us on the amount of work we can handle. So there is some limiting factors there. But to answer your other question, most of the clients that come to us, if we use, well, we don't anymore, but in the past when we've used themes that we've purchased, typically what the theme looks like when we purchase it and then what it looks like when we launch it, it's very different. So it's not really we're just making a quick buck with buying the theme and then activating it. So there is, I feel like we are still bringing value to the table for our services.
You could make an argument that even if you didn't, you're bringing value because they wouldn't know how to do it.
Yeah, that's right. And most of our clients are business owners, and they literally don't have time to even think about building their own website. And so, I mean, even if we did just buy a theme and throw it up for them, they would be happy with that probably. We go above and beyond that by far for them. But I would say, yeah, it's hard. Like we were talking earlier about plugins and the value of the plugin versus what it costs when you download it for free. There's this kind of perceived value when you pay for something that, it may not even be as good as a free plugin, but there's the perceived value there.
At Imaginuity, we do a lot of what we do isn't just building the website. We do a lot of creative strategy. So it's like a marketing company. So we'll do signage and those kinds of things. So we start with wireframing. So we'll gather requirements and then do wireframes for the client to kind of figure out which pages are we going to have, what's the functionality. And then we split it up, and our design team will go work in Photoshop to do comps. And our developers will start building out the functionality to find in the wireframes. And then once we get approval on the comps, we'll take those and then cut them up into HTML and CSS, WordPress theme, and lay them on top of the functionality that we've already been building.
Yeah, at RD